Welcome everyone. Before we continue on to the rest of the coding lectures, I want to take a moment to understand hallucinations. Remember that while Bard is running the powerful Gemini model in the backend and has the ability to look up information on the internet, it's still prone to hallucinations. And you're probably going to encounter these sort of hallucinations a lot more often when it comes to using Google Bard for code. Hallucinations are typically thought of as a large language model making up information based on the fact that large language models at their core are trained to predict the next most likely text to occur. When it comes to using Bard to generate code for us, it sometimes can get confused as to what methods are available on a library. However, it should be noted that Gemini is really quite good at avoiding hallucinations by using the internet, especially for normal text prompts. For example, if you ask for a Supreme Court case that doesn't exist, Bard will usually push back and say something like, "I'm not aware of that case, please give me more clarifying information." But when it comes to generating code, it can still provide code that doesn't actually work. So let's take a look at a few examples to clarify in particular what we mean by hallucinations, how to be aware of them, and how you can attempt to alleviate these issues. Let's get started. Okay, so here I am at Bard. To begin, I first want to show you an example of Bard potentially repeating information that is not necessarily true, but I wouldn't personally classify it as a hallucination. For example, what if I tell Bard to tell me the founding story of the company Netflix and the late fee? You may have heard of this legend yourself, where the founders of Netflix, specifically one of them, Reed Hastings, is renting Apollo 13 at a local Blockbuster, and then he forgets to return it. This is back in the day that you would rent a VHS or a DVD, and he's hit with a $40 late fee, enough of a late fee that he should have just bought the movie. And so he gets angry and says, you know what, I'm going to start a DVD by mail service, which is what Netflix used to be, and he teams up with Mark Randolph. And then, that's how the company is born. Later on, they go into streaming. And if we check out the other drafts, you'll notice they all mention this idea of the late fee. So again, this Apollo 13 late fee, this happens to be in all of them. Now, this is technically a completely made up story. The problem is the founders themselves made it up. And in fact, you can check out the book That Will Never Work by one of the co-founders of Netflix, Mark Randolph, and he basically admits that they created this mythology of no more late fees and this Apollo 13 late fee story to get the traction going on Netflix because it was such a great story on its founding. In reality, Mark Randolph and Reed Hastings were commuter buddies, and they were constantly thinking of what a good next company idea would be. And just over and over testing new ideas, they figured out that they could make Netflix work when they realized they could actually mail a DVD in regular size postage. Now, if I start a new chat and I say, how did the company Netflix start? Question mark. Again, Gemini with Bard is smart enough to know that it's probably a blend of this inspirational idea that may or may not have been super specific or made up. And you can see now that I haven't really talked about the late fee and I didn't use the word story, so I didn't ask for the particular story, I'm more asking for the truth, it starts saying, hey, that's a convenient narrative. Some co-founder accounts suggest it wasn't quite that specific, which is exactly what I was referring to in this book, That Will Never Work. So Mark Randolph basically admits that it was kind of a made up story that sounded really good. And you can see here, it starts to go into a lot more detail. Again, it says, hey, this incident is essentially apocryphal. It didn't really happen. And it tells you more and more about Netflix. So is the original late fee here, is this a hallucination? I would argue no. It's not really a hallucination in the sense that it's giving us tokens or text that are not true just because they were statistically the next most likely token. Here, it's kind of repeating a false story that you would find all over the internet and even in real life. In fact, if you kind of rewind it back to the late 90s or early 2000s and ask Reed Hastings himself, how did Netflix come to be, he would probably tell you that late fee blockbuster story. So it's not really Bard's fault here that it's quote unquote telling you false information. And you can see it's smart enough that if you don't lean it to go with the story aspect of the late fee, it will actually give accounts saying, hey, it's probably not actually that specific on that. So pretty smart already. Now, what do we mean by a true hallucination? A true hallucination happens a lot more often when you're asking for code. I tried my best to try to get Bard to hallucinate something like a fake Supreme Court case, but I found that it was just too good at consistently asking me questions and kind of honing in on a real case, so I was not able to get it to hallucinate via just normal text. But it should be noted that even at the bottom, they still warn you that Bard may display inaccurate information, including about people, so double check its responses. So you should always keep that in mind. But you're probably going to experience hallucinations a lot more often when dealing with code. So for example, I'm going to ask it to use Python and matplotlib to create a Sankey diagram from an example data set generated with NumPy. And then I'm going to ask it to maybe only give me the code, no further explanation. So I will go ahead and run this and see if I can get this block of code, and then I'm going to try to run it. And as a quick note, I am running this just online at jupyter.org/try. So again, it's jupyter.org/try. This is the link I'm on. I've gone ahead and just opened up a notebook online, and then let's check out Bard here, or Bard, and then I'm going to copy this, and let's see if this actually works. So I'm going to copy this, and remember, you can actually just copy code here with that little copy code. And I'm going to put this into a cell and run this Python code and see if it works. And you can see that it technically got a value error. So what's the error? Is this a hallucination? Maybe, maybe not. But you can see here, this is probably a lot more of a hallucination than our first example of the Netflix story being fake. You can see that it's actually just giving you values that don't really make sense. Here it has 2 by 3. But then you can see it has 3 sources and 3 destinations. So it kind of looks like it wasn't actually matching up here because it's misunderstanding how the shapes of flow 2 by 3 and the labels 6 are incompatible. So how do you actually fix this? There's a couple different ways you can try fixing this. You can try just copying and pasting your error code back into Bard and inform it, hey, that didn't work. Send it back and see what it gives you as a result. And you'll see that it will attempt to give you the fixed results. So option 1B, option 2A, etc. Option 2B, repeat the first row. So we can try this. So I'll copy these 2 lines and see if replacing them fixes this or not. But keep in mind, this is probably going to be a big part of your experience in using Bard for code, is just trying to figure out the best way to use the code it initially gives you, and you may have to do a little bit of back and forth with Bard in order to fix this. So I have labels, and let me fix that. So we'll say right here, let me add that code. So I have this new label source, flows, and I'm going to delete that one. Let's rerun that. And you can see it's still giving me an error. So now it just said 9 labels instead. So I can try to do another solution that it said. Maybe this one will work. I'll copy that and paste that in. And you can see that Bard doesn't actually fix this using the error messages. So I can keep doing this, but more likely than not, you're going to end up in a cycle where back and forth, Bard is not able to fix this just with the error keys. So how do you actually fix this? Well, probably the best way to fix this is to either use Bard or a Google search to figure out a working example from the documentation and then have Bard edit that to what you need. So for example, I could come over here to matplotlib and I can see there's a working example in the documentation of a Sankey diagram. It's probably a lot easier for Bard to work off this example and edit it as needed rather than trying to figure out the whole thing from scratch on its own. So I can always come back to Bard, start a new chat, and then I'm going to copy and paste some of that code. So we'll say, using this code example from matplotlib documentation, and I'll copy and paste in the code from that. And let me add in the other 2 lines here. Then I will say, go ahead and edit this to add in a source that is of value 2, and in, let's say, output, well, let's say add a flow output that is of value too. So starting with code that I know works, but then I need Bard to edit it, is usually a much better recipe for success than trying to get Bard to do it all on its own. And whoops, it actually ran the code here. That was not my intention. So it's showing me the actual graph of running this. Let me go ahead and edit this and tell it not to run that code. So we'll say update and edit this. So return the updated Python code. So let me go ahead and update that. You can see that it was actually able to execute that code and give me an updated diagram. That was not what I wanted. I just wanted the code itself. All right, so there is the updated code. I'm going to go ahead and copy this. We'll come back to Jupyter here, and let's see if this code will now work for us. And there you can see it is working. Now I should point out, it looks like it's broken, but technically speaking, I just chose some crazy values. Like I chose 2 as a value when everything else is 0.15, 0.5, 1/5, etc. So the plot looks really ugly, but it is technically correct. To prove that to you, I can say the flows here for -2, it updated it. I can make that -0.1. Let me make this one 0.1. And you can see the code's still working. Again, kind of looks like a really ugly piece of code because I used ridiculous values, but I'm not getting any errors anymore. So again, when using Bard, you want to start from a source of truth of code and then ask it to edit that. That's usually going to give you a much higher success rate with Bard and hallucinations rather than trying to go back and forth with errors. Okay, now let's dive deeper into code in the next lectures.